Hello YouTubers, this is the 12th video where we continue our end-to-end enterprise level Blazor server-side application where we walk through all the different scenarios and all the different things that we need to do to be able to build a functional web application, something that you can trust to handle millions and millions of records without it having any trouble processing the data and actually serving as many end users as you can, as it possibly can. There's a couple of important things I want you to understand here. The last time we talked a little bit about, being able to give the end user a little bit of a status report, right? So when you hit a button, you're reporting status, saying submitting, and then it fails. It says, well, it failed. Here's why it failed. And then if it succeeds, we say, well, so the submission have been completed successfully. Move on to the next thing. Today we're going to take this a little bit further, right? We talked a little bit in the 11th session about two things. We said we don't want people to be able to monkey around with the data. So when you click submit, all your edit fields shall immediately go into a read-only mode. That's number one. Number two, we wanted to be able to say after the submission is completed, take the user completely into a different page. Now, why are we doing this? What's the point of this? It's a cool thing to learn about from a technology standpoint, but why are we actually doing this? Now, let me help you understand here some of the aspects and some of the patterns that surround this series when it comes to learning patterns and stuff. I'm bringing to you the concept or the idea of building a better user experience as an engineer. All right, you have to understand that the main goal of building software is to somehow one way or another improve the quality of life in general for the people that are using the software. Given that software is super involved today into every single aspect of our lives, it's really important that you actually invest a little bit of time and effort to make sure that your end user is happy. You're actually trying to bring about, comfort and happiness and actually bring about a better user experience that actually helps them use the system. It's not enough, and I know a lot of engineers will say, well, if it works, it works. No, it's not enough that it works. It has to work beautifully. Just like a beautiful flower in a field, a flower doesn't have to be that beautiful to perform or function as a flower, but yet it's really beautiful to look at. People, take pictures of it, they take it home, they hang it on the walls. There is something more beyond just functionality in the universe around us, and this is what I'm really trying to bring to you. These are the ideas that I'm trying to bring about. My videos are mainly trying to help financial disadvantaged students and children around the world, to be able to provide free schooling systems. So, schools would hopefully redirect these funds to these financial disadvantaged students and their families. Number two, you are the goal to teach you and help you see what technology looks like when building, modern web applications in C# through Blazor. But number three, to bring about a new perspective. This is not your typical tutorial where you in very abstract way learning about how to do a particular technology or use a particular thing without actually surrounding it with the context. The context here is very important. I'm trying to tell you a story, and through that story, I'm using code to tell you that story as I'm talking to you about why we're doing what we're doing. So let's go ahead. Let's jump back into our component here real quick. So here is Visual Studio, and I don't have the API running. Let's just, go back to where we started, and let's see what we talked about before. So here's a web page, and it's gonna spin up a student registration page. And we're going to start with a couple of things, right? We're going to start to better the experience by not allowing people to type in and click the button over and over again, because that's really a bad experience. But at the same time, we want to take people to another page. We want to be able to take people to another page so these people, don't have to monkey around with the controls and the functionality and all that. So let's see here. Let me start my application here. Let me actually build my application real quick. Let me get master. Let me get the master branch. Let me increase the font size here real quick. 175%. I hope that's enough. If the font size is not good enough, please let me know. I build these videos for you your comfort, your ability to be able to watch these videos and be able to actually learn from them is actually my top priority. So let's go ahead here. Build all started. All right, so I have two projects built. Excuse me, and let's go about running the application. Give it a second there. Right, let's see our, yeah, it's starting. It's just loading some symbols. I have enabling native symbols turned on. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time to actually kick off the first time, but let's see what happens if I just cancel. Yep, there you go. All right, so here's our application. And we have a student identity and all that kind of stuff. And if I go and say, okay, I'm submitting a good student identity like this, and Hassan, M, Habib, and I go here and pick up a gender, and I say, here's a date of birth, and I click submit, it will say submitting, and then it will fail because I don't have my API running. Here's the problem that we're trying to solve. As I'm saying submitting right now, anyone could just keep clicking like this, and they're actually sending requests one after another to the system, you know, and it's a bad user experience because it's allowing people to do something they're not supposed to do, right? I'm sending way too many requests back to the server, but at the same time, I am also, you know, not trying to lead them through a better experience, right? Because a lot of users, a lot of users sometimes will just be sitting there waiting, submitting, said, well, this system is not working. I don't know what to do here. You need to be as interactive with the user as much as you can. Otherwise, what's the point of actually learning modern web and be able to refresh things on the page if you're actually not able to interact and actually communicate with the person as fast and as much as you can? So here's the first goal. We're going to write some tests in here. And we want to make sure our tests in good shape. Number one thing, we want to enable this great feature here where we immediately turn all these boxes into read-only. We want to turn these boxes into read-only, right? Ideally, you should have a very straightforward thing in HTML, very basic HTML here that basically tells you, oh, I want to be disabled. Like this. I don't know. Yeah, see, that guy now is disabled. See? You can also say disabled equal true. I think that also would work. Yep, that would also work. And that's what we're going to be using. So we're adding a new functionality here that says when you click on a button, on the submit button, disable all these controls and just tell the user loading, please wait. Right? There's so many different options that you can use, but we mainly want to focus on not allowing the users to actually control these components while the submission is happening. That's a better experience. Let's see how we can do this. Obviously, you probably have thought this already. We want to immediately go into our base components, and I'm going to look into my text box base right here. And in the text box base, I'm going to have a functionality that allows me to enable and disable the components in my system. How does that work? Let's go ahead in here and say, well, here's a property. And we can go and say is enabled. Because this is a base component, there's no test yet. It's something that abstracts away the actual functionality. And also we want to be able to go and say, well, here's another private void, right, method that says disable component or disable. Just disable. And what this disable thing is going to do, this function here is going to do, all that it's doing is that it's going and saying is enabled equal false. That's it. Is enabled equal false, which basically means I can go up here and go into another one. I say, you know, disabled equal is enabled. right? And the language here is, I don't like the language in here. Let's say is disabled then, is disabled. Is disabled, so is disabled will equals true. By default, we want this is disabled to be false. So the default value of disabled, we want this to be false. How do we go about doing that? You can very easily set this up in here as false. In fact, actually, I don't think you need to do that because in Booleans, you know, the default value in a Boolean is false by default, so I think we're fine. So let's go ahead and put that in there in our UI. So this here is our UI. It says is disabled, true or false. Perfect. Let's see if that actually is the case. What we want to do now is that we want to go and say, well, you know, if there is an error, we want to enable it. If there is, we want to flip the switch back. So I want to go here and add another function here that says private void enable, like this. This dot is disabled equal false. All right, so I'm having two functionality. When I click the button, if an error comes back, I'm going to enable all my controls. Right? I say, okay, this submission has failed, try again, or contact support. Now, what if it succeeds? Then we're done here. During that submission, I shouldn't be allowed to actually play around with things. All right? I should do the same thing as well in the button base in here, where I can go and say, well, for the button based, I can say disabled equals is disabled, like this. And let's go ahead, just very easy. I know some of these things you might have actually figured it out by yourself by now, but we want to be able to actually allow you, and we probably should allow this to be parameterized as well, so you can actually pass in a value. If you want something to be by default disabled, we should give that kind of power to people. So let's parameterize it. I like that. Let's parameterize this guy and say is disabled. And is disabled is false by default. And let's steal these two functions in here, because it's our own code. Why not? And let's go ahead and add these functions in here. So now I have is disabled true or false. Oh, Boolean. Like this. And now my button base is also set up. Let's do the same thing with datetime picker. Disabled is disabled, like this. Same thing. Here's the functions. Every function should have this kind of ability where you can control enabling it and disabling it. Someone asked me this over YouTube. You know, someone sent me a question the other day, said to me, you know, can we have a base component and all that? I said, sure. You know, if you want to go that route, that's yours. I try to keep my stuff as separate as possible. It means a little bit of redundancy at the beginning, but when it comes to debugging and developing experience, it's much, much better. Unfortunately, we think so much about, you know, abstraction and, you know, and having one place where we can change everything, but we don't think about things down the road like single points of failure and what could possibly happen if I want to do a slight diversion in a particular component. There are so many different schools of thought when it comes to working this way, but for my preference, I'm just going to stick to what I know, which is basically, you know, to this method for now, which is basically, you know, just go ahead and, you know, define every component individually, actually allow any component to be downloaded and worked with individually. And we haven't even touched, you know, we're just scratching the surface when it comes to Blazor. There's so many, this is why you'll notice 3 zeros in my series numbers, is because there's so many different things that I really still want to share with you. And going through an entire project like that, I am learning as well as I go with you. So this is parameter as well, and this is public. Boolean is disabled, like this. And let's steal the methods again. And if you do Windows V, it will help you. Even if you copy other things, you know, if you do Windows V, it'll help you actually pull out something that a friend of mine, his name is Haral, he basically helped me learn about this. If you do Control V, you can actually pull out things that you copied before, right? So it's like the entire clipboard. Sorry, if you do, yeah, Windows V, yep, it'll give you that kind of option and you'll be able to use it. So, okay, I have is disabled, and probably, I probably need to change those into public. So let me find every instance of this and just change it into public, because I want to be able to access these methods from the outside world. So across the entire solution, let's just disable. Let's just fix all of these. So there's 3 occurrences, not a big deal. There's one place, however, excuse me. There's one place, however, where I think it's in the text box where I define this guy as not a parameter. So I'm going to define that guy as a parameter here. Parameter, like this. So this guy is a parameter, and there you go. Funny though, I don't know why this, yeah, it's because I made it public. Okay, so let's change the rest of those accordingly. So this is enabled, and we're going to change it to public. Oops, let's change this to public like this. Here we go. For occurrences, sounds about right, and here we go. All right, perfect. So we set up our components with a new capability that allows us to enable and disable them programmatically or through a parameter while we're using the markup. Great. Let's commit this first. Let's go ahead and say, well, you know, allow components to be disabled and enabled programmatically, like this. Okay, so we have this guy. Now let's put this a little bit in test. Let's go and write a little test. On our test here, now we have a new different set of things that we need to validate, right? The first thing I want to validate here, and you have to actually think about the cases, what you're working with. So you remember how we said, you know, this text box should not be null and all that kind of stuff. We probably also need to validate that these boxes are enabled, right? They want to validate that these boxes are enabled. So what are we going to do about this? We're going to improve our test a little bit. You know, I'm going to take each and every one of those like this. And I'm going to go ahead and say this student identity box dot is disabled should be false. It should not be disabled. All right, let's try this with the so we tested the placeholder and the text box. Let's move on to the next box. See how everything is very sophisticated and descriptive. The label on the box, you know, whether it's enabled or disabled, everything is accounted for, right? So let's take this guy as well. Student first name, that's right. And then so each one of those, you have 3s now. You have 3 of this and 3 of this. And then we have middle name. You want to make sure this guy is also disabled. Is disabled, should be false. Like this. And where else? We have student last name all the way down here. Let's take this guy as well. Student last name is disabled, and that should be false, like this. And so is the rest of all of these. So this is student gender drop down, should not be null, should be of this type. You know, we should probably go and check as well and say, are you disabled? Even for these drop downs. To be honest with you, I don't know if that's something that you can get natively out of a drop down, but let's find out. Okay, let's find out. Because most of these controls that we're using right now are eventually going to be flipped out into some open source or even proprietary library like SyncFusion or Telerik, where you get to actually look at, you know, or DevExpress or any of these open source nice map, Blazor. There's so many different UI libraries out there today, and a lot of them are actually free and open source and free for community. The contribution in this field is beyond amazing. And I really highly recommend just the fact that you're watching this video automatically. I know that you are actually jumping in on that wagon and trying to learn as much as you can, which is great. So here's this guy. This is the date of birth, right? And this guy is disabled. Should be false, like this. And also I want my submit button to be disabled, to be not disabled. At this stage, at the rendering initial stage, should not be disabled. So is disabled should be should be false. All right. So this test, ideally, as large as it is, it's basically just testing your UI, and basically it's making sure that your components are in good shape. Let's go ahead and test it out. The beautiful thing about these unit tests is that they expose to you what you just can't see, what you think is true, but not necessarily the case. Let's just see what comes out of it. Here we go. Test finished. Total test 1, and this guy passed. What does that mean? It means that your code now is protected. You're fortifying your code, and you're expressing yourself through that code by going and saying, well, if someone in the student registration component just feels happy one day and goes and say is disabled equals true, you will have a test to actually protect your UI. This guy is going to blow up. This guy is going to throw an exception. Sorry, it's gonna report failure. As you can see here, it's reporting failure. Why? Because it says I expected the button to be not disabled, and I noticed that it is disabled. If you click in here, it'll tell you exactly what's going on. See how easy this is? You can control, what's enabled and what's not enabled in the system. Also, before I fix the broken test, or just revert to what I did, if I go real quick into my student registration component here, and I just run my app, you will notice that the button is actually disabled. This is us trying to actually test the visualization of it, just to make sure the system is actually functioning as expected. So let's just go ahead here real quick. Give it a second. There we go. Look at this button. The button is not clickable. And it's not clickable today simply because you disabled it by default. See how much power you can do, just as simple as that. And the more you do of these videos and the more you do of these practices, you're gonna become really strong when it comes to controlling web applications, not having to scan and HTML and do all that kind of stuff. All right, so let's set that back like this. In some really in some teams, in some software development teams that follow particular schools of thought, even if the initial value is false by default, they will go back and tell you, no, set it to false, even if it is false by default. But that's a little extreme. That's a little bit too hard on people, right? They will go and tell you, nope, set is disabled to false. And if you tell them no, but it's a Boolean, it's default value is said, I don't know that. I don't know that. I need to be as expressive as humanly possible. If you want to take that route, all power to you. I'm just giving you the tools to actually be able to do that, but I wouldn't personally go that route myself. I feel it's a little bit off the top. So right, so that means if I run my test here again, what's going to happen? Here we go. And the test has passed. So this is the first thing. There's no failing test really, so I'm just going ahead and saying pass, and just saying that I have improved my test to do something in particular to protect my code. All right, so Control-MO. Control-MO will basically collapse all the methods so you can see what's going on. The new one I learned recently is Control-KE, which basically cleans up your system. It's just like this guy. I see warnings here in my system. Yeah, that's just Blazor, the Visual Studio trying to catch up with Blazor. These two seem to, do a lot of work trying to catch up with each other. So, it's not a big deal. So let's go ahead in here. This here, it says should display submitting status before student is submitted successfully. This one is the one I care about. And I'm so glad that we talked about this last time, because I only want to disable my fields in this little short period of time, right? Really tiny short period of time where when I click the button, I can't control anything. I can't click that button again. Nobody can abuse my system. So here's what we're gonna do, my friend. If you go into should render in here, I can steal most of the code that I have done here for the is disabled and just verify that in here. Right? So let's verify that stuff. This is all the stuff I want to verify in here. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. I think I have like about 5 or 6 of these components. So I have the student identity. I have the student first name. I have the student middle name. I have student last name. I have gender. I want more. I have the date of birth picker, and I have the button itself, which is the big one, because I don't want people to keep clicking things as I'm doing stuff. So this is the submit button. What else did I miss? First name, identity, first name, middle name, last name, gender, date of birth, and submit button. Is that the exact order? Now I told you some people have certain schools of thought that really pushes them towards extreme. I will tell you this right now. I'm a little bit extreme when it comes to ordering things. So if it's gender and date of birth, then my test should also say gender and date of birth. If it's not saying that, I wouldn't be happy, right? I think that's what it is, the order that we have here. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that actually my controls should be disabled for as long as the system is working on something. And that's the piece that I'm trying to show you today. As long as the system is trying to work on something and trying to submit something, let's go ahead and continue to keep all of these controls locked until the system is done. And then we're going to test the case when the system is actually done. Should I re-enable those or should I go into another page? We'll talk about that in a little bit. So now if I run this test should technically fail. Why? Because I don't really disable my control while the system is submitting. I'll show it in a second. Here we go. Boom, failed. Why failed? Because everything is supposed to be true and now it's set to false. We got ourselves, so it should display submitting status and disable controls before student is submitted successfully. Did I exceed 120 characters? No, I didn't. This is 107. Keep it 120 characters. Just your way of telling the people that are using laptops or smaller screens. Not everybody gets to have some 49-inch screens where they can see the entire code base. So be a little bit a good citizen there and tell them, okay, I'm gonna keep my code within 120 characters so they can see what's actually happening. All right, so we have a failing test. Let's run it one more time with the new name. Should display submitting status and disable controls before student is submitted successfully. Beautiful, right? And actually, submission completes. Why is that? Because when I say student submitted successfully, I'm actually implying that it may succeed or may not, and that's not true. I don't know if it's going to succeed or not. I know that we're sending an API call, and I know that we're coming back with something, but I don't know if it's going to succeed or not. So as long as student is submission completes, like this. Let's run it one more time with the new name. I keep changing the name. Put a little bit of time and effort into your naming conventions. Make sure that you are as descriptive as possible so you can maintain your code. So people don't come in and delete your code. You don't want people to go ahead and delete your code. That's not a good idea. That just indicates that people don't think that your code is worth maintaining. So here's this guy, and this guy is fail. Perfect. So that's the goal. That's what we're set up to do. We are trying to say whatever I'm doing while I'm submitting this, everything should be disabled. Nobody should be able to change anything until we're done. All right? All right, great. Then let's go ahead and go and say in here, when I submit my student, which is registered student right here, and I'm hitting this guy and say report student submission succeeded, right? We're gonna use that method here. Report student submission waiting, and we're gonna use that to actually disable our controls. Let's do that. Let's go ahead in here and say, what's our controls? We have the identity, right? Disable. This dot first name, disable. This dot student middle name, disable. Last name, disable. And gender, disable. And this dot date of birth, disabled, and the most dangerous one of them all is the button. Submission button should be disabled. Right? So now, now my method is doing a little bit more than that. Right? It's doing a little bit more than that. So in here will be um, 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 report, not just reporting, said waiting status, apply waiting status. So now it's a completely different ball of wax when it comes to this, because you're doing absolutely something different. You're not just saying, actually, let's say apply submitting status. There you go. Or loading status. This basically you saying all these controls will be disabled in addition to the fact that I'm going to say submitting. All right. Does this make my test pass? I don't know. Let's find out. Let's go back in here into my test. Not this guy, but this guy here. And let's run this test. Now this test is supposed to come back as true because during that submission I've actually disabled the world. Boom, there you go. Right? What happened? What happened is that I actually verified that all my controls are disabled during the submission of a particular student. Is that really true? Let's find out. Do your due diligence, just run it. Normally I tell people when you submit a PR, it would be nice if you take a little screenshot, especially if you're doing something with the UI. Let's try it out. ABC, we don't have an API, so it takes a little bit of time to try to reconnect to the API. So we're going to get a little bit of delay here without actually having to fake it. So there's Habib and male 1985 submit. What's happening? Oh, look at that. So it's disabled, but did it disable these? It didn't disable these. How come it didn't disable these? Why it didn't disable these? Because we need to do status changed. We need to do status has changed in order for these things to actually happen. We forgot that part. See, and that's why I always say, you know, let's make sure, go and test your information, actually make sure these things work. Let's try it with one and then we'll work with the rest. So let's try it with the text box because we have more text boxes than anything else. Something like status has changed would actually help a lot with this. So when we're disabling like this, let's just go ahead and add this little piece of magic here that says status has changed like this. And I think we did this with the button itself. Like if you look at the button, did we do this in no, this is click invoked. Huh, I could swear we changed this somewhere. Anyway, yeah, there you go. Invoke async state has changed. You know, let's see if we can actually do this. So this is disabled. Let's see if this actually works out for us. Here we go. C ABC123 Hassan M Beeb male 19 doesn't matter, and then we click this. Ah, look at that. Look at that. Now that's a beauty, right? So we really wanted to disable this guy. And you can see here I disabled everything, right, during my submission, but there's a problem with that. There's a little teeny tiny problem with that. The problem that I'm seeing here is that the problem that we're seeing here is that we're not bouncing back after we get an error. So that requires another test. That requires another test. But let's just apply the same logic to everything else, because you shouldn't actually, a lot of people will go and say, put this in your in your actual logic here, that status has changed or whatever. I don't really like that. I don't really vote for that at all. Instead, you know, let your brokers, where you don't really control all the code or you don't own all the code, let your brokers or base components in this case take care of that. So let's do this with enabled and disabled, and we're going to copy both of these methods and apply them across the board. Let's do that. State has changed. like this, and let's copy these two guys, and let's put them everywhere, basically. I still need to remember why I made this as invoke async. I think we wanted it to be asynchronous somehow, but it seems to work fine without it. So let's see if that actually, I think it might actually impact the tests in one way or another. We'll see. Here you go, invoke. So now everything is changed. Is my test still passing? I don't know. Let's find out. So we changed this guy a little bit. Let's go back into our test. And let's run our test a little bit. So it's just a display submitting status. Yeah, this guy. Is this guy? Oh, we have a failure here. Let's see what the failure is. To be true. And I think that's because of this invoke async thing. Really. I think that's really why we did this with the label, and I think that's a real reason. So let's just do this here. Go. I also noticed that our datetime and our dropdown weren't disabled. There might be a different way to disable them. We'll find out in a second. It's a fun little journey that we're doing together. And let's see if that actually does the trick for us. So let's go back to our test. Control minus. Here you go. And let's just run this guy here. And let's see how that works out. And pass. All right, great. So we're kicking this asynchronously and letting it do its business. Does it work in the real world? Only time will tell. Let's run it in here. Here we go. Let's add some values. Oh, what's that? And submit. Beautiful. Look, they're all disabled now. Look at this. And it errors out. Magic. Just like that. Right? So now you're not allowing people to monkey around or click on the button again and again because you're not allowing them to actually control things. But when it errors out, we need to enable these things back. We need to ensure that all of these controls that we talked about are actually back to their original status. So how do we do that? It's really simple. You probably have guessed it by now. Let's just submit this guy as passing first. Pass. And let's go ahead and see our erroneous status. Ah, there you go. This is where we're throwing errors. And we want to verify that we're actually putting the right status. So we're already verified that the status label is right, but we want to verify that we set the controls back to enabled mode, you know, in order for the user to be able to fix it. Otherwise, how are they supposed to fix it? Right? How are they supposed to fix it? Right? So let's go ahead and do that. And why do I have this guy in here, by the way? Student view validation. I technically, yeah, I don't do anything with this guy. I don't need it. Clean as you go. Like Uncle Bob always says, leave it better than you found it. Boy Scout rule. I call those code rubs. It's like, rubbing glasses, just making sure that it's clean. All right, let's go back to here. And in my, we can now copy these controls in here so easily. So I can just go ahead in here and copy those. And in my exceptions area, I can just go ahead in here and verify these things are back to their original status. And that's what I want to do. So this should be false. This should be false. False, 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 and false. So what am I doing? I don't think the indentation here is right. Let's see what happened. Yeah, there you go. So this guy basically, actually for both tests, I'm going to do the same thing. I want to go ahead in here and say, well, if it errors out and I'm asking the user to do more things, I may now allow them to actually click again and submit again and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, both of these tests are going to fail immediately, instantaneously. They are going to fail simply because you're not allowing people to use that. Like as of today, I'm not allowing people to go back and modify this system. Is that the case? Let's find out. Here's our tests. Did we pass? We shouldn't. Let's try this again. There you go. So I have 2 failing tests. It's more like 4 actually. But here we go. Here's one test right here. And here's another test right here. Great. Let's collapse these and let's report both of these tests as failure. This is fail. And this one also fail. I normally don't really super like the idea of submitting 2 failing tests, but sometimes when it's the same behavior and the same result, maybe it would be okay. Maybe. So let's go ahead in here. So now I have failing tests. That means that when I submit a student and it errors out, I want to come back and I want it to enable my controls again. I want my controls to be enabled again. So how do we go about doing that? Let's go into our actual implementation. Do you see that student submission failed in here? Instead of doing that, we're going to use that same logic that we used in here. Apply submission failed. Submission failed. So pretty much everything we've done here, we're just going to turn disabled into enabled. You can select and do Control R. I think Control F. Hold on. Should be Control R. I don't see it. Where's my dialog? Control Shift R. Nope. Yeah, I did Control F. And then I want to replace disable with enable. Right, so replace in selection. It should replace 7 occurrences. Sounds about right. And I really hope I called it enable. Did I not call it enable? Maybe I called it enabled instead of enable. Ah, okay, fine. Let's fix this. Let's go ahead in here, across the solution, entire solution. Here is public void enabled, and we're gonna change it into public void enable because it's a method, and a method is supposed to have an action, not report a status. It would be get status or get is enabled, verify is enabled. All those methods have, in modeling and simulations, methods are your way to simulate. So, but that's a different discussion for another day. So public void enable, change it to enable, change around, all around, and we should probably change this to invoke async at all as well for enable, right? Because we did the same thing here. Did I do the same thing for both? For both? For both. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. So is this guy happy now? I hope so. Let's go back into our student registration component. It is all enable. Now my failing test should pass because I actually enabled these components. I went back and I said, if I come back with a failing status, I want to, there you go, I want all my controls to be enabled. So now both of these tests have passed. Let's go ahead in here and say pass. And this guy as well has passed. But is that the case? Right? In theory, that works. Let's go ahead and see if I run my application, does it actually give me that status? Here we go. ABC 123 son beep male 1985 submit student disabled and beautiful. It tried and tried and tried, and then it turned on the submission, you know, as soon as a failure has happened. This is what I want. This is called experience, you know. This is basically allowing people not to abuse the tool and keep clicking, right? In fact, actually, you can even add more functionality to it by going and saying, you know, you are only allowed to submit, you know, a given number of times for a particular number of data. Like if the data didn't change, you're trying to protect your application, right? So you're basically saying you can only submit that many times within a period of time. You could have a stopwatch, and you say you can only submit that many times from that particular session. You can protect your application however you want. But in here, look at this. We reported status, we disabled controls, waited until we got a feedback, and when we got a bad feedback, like okay, submitted feedback, it failed. Now we are in good state. There is one more thing, obviously, that you may have guessed. What happens when I succeed? As of right now, if you actually submit and succeed in your submission, what's going to happen is that we're not going to enable these controls anymore. But this is the topic for the next session. The next session, for Blazor session 13, and I'm really happy that I've gone this far with you in these sessions, is to be able to move you over. We're going to use something called Navigation Manager, and we're going to mock this guy, and I'm going to show you the secrets of building an enterprise application where you can actually control all the external dependencies. As you can see right now, like your code is native. Like as long as your component, look at this, as long as your component code is code that you have written with your own hand, you're going in the right direction. Like look at this. There is nothing in this component here that is not something we've created with our own hands. The mocked up view service, the component states, the registration, everything in this layer, the equivalent of the business layer in your view and your services and view services, it's all local, not native, local, something that you've actually written with your own hand. So now that I have spun up the service, and I think this service should be up very shortly. Spun up the service, and it's probably loading some stuff. Here you go. All right, I have a service running, and I have a bunch of profiles in the system. Great, everything is up and running. Let's go ahead and submit and see what happens. This should basically succeed. Look at this. But it won't enable my controls anymore. Oh, still, hold on. I probably need to fix my API endpoint. Let's go ahead in here. Let's see why that happened. So my configure, okay, so I need to keep my API running. I want to show you what this looks like when things actually succeed, so we can wrap up this session on a good note. I don't want you to see things failing. So 501, and yeah, okay. So I'm running it in IIS, so it has a different address. If you're running it, so you can run your APIs in two different modes, as hosted in IIS or self-hosted, which is the beautiful thing about .NET Core and .NET 5 and all that. But that's also a discussion for another day. So now that I have my API hooked up correctly, let's go ahead and try to submit again. I might have missed something or two. Hold on. I probably need to start my application here because the configurations have already loaded in the system. Here we go. Here we go. ABC. Yeah, I needed to restart my application because I still had the older values in there. Hassan M. Habib. Mail. 1985. Submit. Here we go. Let's see what's happening here. Let's debug this together. I have my endpoint right here, and I have OSSS portal through the API, and this is the API endpoint. Let's build everything just to make sure. There you go. Let me also run my Estimizer core acceptance test just to make sure my system is in good state. And while I'm at it, let me get straight from master. Oh, I was actually doing a code test in here, so it might be, I might have changed some things because I wasn't running a master branch in here. Let me hide the picture here, the camera, so you can see what branch I'm working with. So in here you can see master. So okay, I have this master branch. Let me run everything just to make sure I have the one thing I really care about in my acceptance system. That's the beautiful thing about these acceptance tests, is that I want to make sure that submitting a student succeeds. That's all. So this is project skills, work items. Oh, that's not the project. That's funny. I was running the wrong project all this time. OSSS core. I apologize for that. That's why. So probably the configuration should also be in this state. And let's see what we're working with here. Yeah, there you go. So this is OSSS. Too many projects. Working on too many projects. You know, sometimes you will run something by mistake. All right. So this guy should be fine. Let's go back to our UI here. Yeah, there you go. This is hello Mario. That's basically us saying the system is functional. And then here we go. ABC 1, 2, 3. Hassan M. Habib. Mail 1985. Submit. And this guy should come back as still all the controls disabled. And that's the goal. We want it to be like, there you go. So that was a little bit of a quick route, but you know, you see the goal. The goal here is to basically be able to say that, you know, I can only allow the controls when it makes sense for your experience to be able to have that control. But if you don't need that control, you know, then what's the point of giving you the ability to submit while I'm still working on something? This is you just governing the entire experience without having to know your end user. Like I said, for the next session, we're going to talk about directing the user to an entirely new page that says, student submission completed successfully, thank you. Just a simple page that basically takes you to a completely different component or a completely different route, rather. And this route will basically say submission is completed. There are mainly two different schools of thought when it comes to this. Some people say, no, change the component itself so people don't click back on the route and continue to, you know, abuse your system application in a sense. Yeah, if you think about it, allowing people to actually go to a particular route, so slash OSSS/student/registration, right? And they basically have this form. They're going to continue to refresh the page and submit new data. They can very easily automate that. But if you capture the session and you change the component display to say, yeah, this has been submitted, this session is completed for this particular person, they can't just refresh the route and try to come back again to submit more students, right? So, and that can be used in a lot of things, right? That idea, that thought can be used in a lot of things. Obviously, you know, there are so many ways to, to basically breach the security of your web application, which is also another topic that we're going to talk about. How can you secure your Blazor application, not just in the sense that you're picking up the tokens of the user and making sure it's the right user that's actually logged in and all that kind of stuff. Actually, a little bit broader than that. I'm going to show you a little bit of thought when it comes to actually thinking about what's possible when it comes to not allowing your application to be breached and abused and used by some crawling bot, web crawl or whatever the case may be, to actually abuse your application and submit garbage data. That's it for our session. As usual, it's always my pleasure to share as much information as I can with you, and I'm very happy that you get to see that information. At least that I put that information out there for whoever wants to learn it. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to reach out. Drop a comment in the comment section, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in another video. Thank you so much for watching.